How important do you think it is to learn the local language?
I think it's fantastic. I love being able to walk into a cafe, to a grocery store, and being able to speak both Russian and Romanian. It's absolutely incredible. I also feel more at home, and I feel like the people respect me more, and it's a fabulous experience to be able to speak 3 languages in one day.
Okay, that makes it kind of unique in Europe. Do you think that?
It's so unique. Yes, I love it.
Cześć and greetings from Warsaw, Poland. You can probably see behind me some street performers there with some fire. We got a busker playing some music. It is a beautiful late spring actually still here in Warsaw. Beautiful evening, got Warsaw train station, and a lot of guys in particular are going to come to this city this summer, and many of them are going to be maybe thinking of a relocation to Warsaw. And the reason it's known as Conor's Law is because one of my clients who came here with me last year, he didn't want to learn a word of Polish, and at the end he had to agree with me that it basically is a game changer. So in this video I'm going to outline what Conor's Law is and what's the value of it. So let's go. Watch me.
Am prins în o toamnă, anul ăsta e o toamnă minunată.
Da? Toamna este perioada mai interesantă.
Nu, zic că chiar e mai călduroasă toamna asta decât în anii precedenți. E frumos.
Ah, de mai frumos.
În noiembrie, tu ești în tricou.
Da, în tricou sunt în noiembrie. Da, este adevărat. Nu, sunt în Irlanda. Da? Când minus 10 grade.
Te obișnuit.
Da. Sunt în tricou poate.
I looked in my closet and this is the most multilingual t-shirt that I have. So if you recognize any of the languages emblazoned on this t-shirt here, then drop a comment down below and tell me which ones that you recognize. Now, the first main reason to learn the local language, whether you come for relocation to this region or to travel, is pretty obvious, and that is communication. Not everybody in the world speaks English or your native language if it is different to the local language and not English. But we'll just deal with English as it is the world's global lingua franca for the purposes of today's video. And there is a company called Education First which produces an annual ranking, and they give us a pretty good idea about the level of English proficiency by country across the globe. And when I look at the region where I bring my clients to the most, so if we're looking at, say, Poland, other parts of Central Europe, like say Prague, in Czechia, or even down as far as Romania and Bucharest, all the way up to, say, Tallinn in Estonia and the other parts of what are commonly referred to as the Baltic states, so Riga in Latvia or Vilnius in Lithuania. The level of English is actually pretty impressive overall. It's not quite as high as countries like, say, Sweden or Denmark or the Netherlands, where I used to live, where it is really, really, really amazing, their level of English. It's considering they're not native speakers. It's actually not that far off being a native speaker in general. It's a bit lower in this region. However, in those kind of countries, definitely most people will be able to speak a fair deal of English. However, there is a dichotomy when you go to, say, Moldova or Ukraine, where I am now, I'm in Odessa Mama, or say to Kazakhstan, where I go quite often with my clients. There definitely is a significant drop overall in the level of English proficiency. Also, you should be aware that in big cities versus small cities or the countryside, again, it's going to be a lot easier to find people who speak a good level of English in the cities versus small towns and in the countryside. Also, if you are going somewhere where there are a lot of foreigners, so say you go to a restaurant in the historic center of a city, let's say here in Odessa, it's going to be easier to find people who speak English than, say, if you go out to a part of the city that there aren't so many foreigners. Also, if you are dealing with people who've got a higher level of education, also more likely to speak English than people who have less education. So there are just a lot of factors where you're traveling in the region, about how you're going to be able to find people to communicate with if you don't speak the local language. And, you know, I meet people who say or live, they don't just say, they actually live in certain countries in this region for many years and they never learn the local language and they say, I don't need to deal with anyone who doesn't speak English, for example. However, with this dichotomy in particular language, you're probably going to be fine if you are doing the touristic stuff, even here in Odessa, if you just use English. However, you are taking a risk all the time that you're going to end up in a situation where you won't be able to communicate, or you're constantly going to need an interpreter. Obviously, then if you're doing more sophisticated things that involve legal documents, for example, then you would be in a weaker position, or you're negotiating something if you're always dependent on people speaking English. So the first main reason is just communication.
One thing I would just say is that you get that level of credibility with the local people. If you're conversing in the local language, I still think people are a bit wary of Brits here. That could be just the fact that we don't have the greatest of reputations in Europe for partying and whatever else. So it's unquestionably, people are a lot more receptive to you speaking the local language.
So an interesting paradox that I've observed is that as the level of English goes up, which often is correlated with the number of foreigners who come to live in the country and rely on English. So a good example of that is Warsaw. The city has so many people who come from other countries. A lot of them come here in Ukraine and from Belarus, but also a lot of Americans, a lot of Western Europeans are now moving there. And because Polish is such a difficult language, because it's definitely one of the more difficult in the Foreign Service Institute of the State Department in the US, they actually rank it in their third category. So in my experience, having learned many Slavic languages like Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian, and now I'm learning Polish, it is going to take at least double as a native English speaker than say learning Spanish or Italian. Maybe take longer than that. So they tend to all just stick to English, more than 90% of them, if they have that kind of perspective that they're a foreigner and they are maybe hanging out with other foreigners, maybe even living and going to co-working spaces. And for those people, they probably don't really care too much about this video because they're not intending ever to learn the local language, no matter what I say, because they don't actually aspire to join local social groups that would have a lot of Poles in them and integrate themselves more into, say, Polish society. They just want to hang around with other foreigners. And what's interesting is, as you have more and more of those people and the level of English goes up, on the one hand, the necessity to learn the local language for point one, which was communication, goes down, but speaking it for credibility then goes up. So it really depends on your preference. And I've often heard from guys who go to these countries like Sweden or the Netherlands. I actually studied in the Netherlands. I learned Dutch when I was there. And I often met even Western Europeans who told me, oh, Conor, Dutch is so hard. I will never learn it. And that just sounded like a bit of an excuse to me because, well, Dutch is not that hard a language to learn as a native English speaker, or even if you speak Italian or French, it's relatively easy. Believe me, having learned Belarusian, Ukrainian, and even Russian, and now I'm learning Polish, these languages take at least twice as long to learn in terms of time, maybe even 3 times as long than learning, say, Dutch. The thing is, they didn't have the motivation because they did not desire to actually join those other social groups. They were perfectly fine in hanging out in their foreigner bubble, and they actually, some of them even had a bit of disdain for the locals, that they just weren't really there to hang out with them and they want to live in this kind of alternate society that isn't really wedded or interested in the country per se. Everyone's free to make their choice about that. Personally, obviously, I advocate on this channel for being more integrated. If you move to another country and learn the local language is kind of like a no-brainer for me, and I also look at it in terms of what I get out of it over the long term. It is not something that's going to give you a high return on investment in the very beginning. You get a boost, you get a very strong boost in the beginning, and you end up in the middle phase, which takes a long time, and you're not going to get that much value out of it in terms of the social connections, because you'll tend to be a bit hesitant when you speak, because now it's going to be more complex, your speech patterns, as opposed to the very beginning where you're just basically blurting out a little bit more primitively different, very basic sentence structures. And then at the very end, when you get to say on that European Common Framework of Languages around a B2 level, you get a huge return on your investment, but it may be several years down the road. And of course, for a lot of people, I'm not even sure if they're going to hang around long enough in order to get that return on investment. I've had clients who told me that was the best decision they ever made. It was a complete game changer in terms of their social life, especially their dating life. And personally, I've gotten just huge returns on the investment in the languages that I have pursued to learn to a high level. There was none I ever regretted learning for this region, or also the languages that I learned for Western Europe, like Italian, Spanish, and German, and French, etc. So just remember that is an interesting paradox, and it's a personal decision for you to make, whether you want to be more integrated into the society that you move to, or you prefer not to really integrate at all and just rely on English and live in some English-speaking bubble. The decision is yours, and you know which side of the fence that I personally advocate for. Angela, де ми?
Ми в Синевірі.
Як класно тут, так?
Ми декілька років планували сюди приїхати і кожного року відкладали.
А що ти думаєш? Дуже-дуже гарний.
Я думаю,
як
дуже
атмосфера?
гарно.
Так?
Мені подобається.
Так, мені?
Я б тут
Теж?
залишилася декілька днів.
So there I've outlined for you what my clients dub Conor's Law. So you can make of it what you will. Maybe you still decide that learning the local language is not for you. I did have a European client who was investing in real estate in Ukraine recently, and he has other investments. He's from the Nordics, and one of the places he has investments is Estonia. And he said, yeah, I appreciate that. Obviously, it's going to be a big advantage for me to learn Ukrainian. But he said, I'm going to wait for the Ukrainians to learn English. Well, that might be a long wait, first of all. And it's not like Estonia, because that's where you had to get investments, where it's a small language. Ukrainian is spoken by roughly, we'll say 40 million people. And yeah, the zeitgeist is obviously with the Russo-Ukrainian war that probably people are going to be pretty keen to maintain that. So I foresee in the future it being a similar situation to here in Poland, in Warsaw, where it is quite tough socially if you don't speak Polish, even though the level of English is really good here in the city. So if you are down for learning languages in general, not necessarily a specific one, it can be Polish, can be Ukrainian, it can be Russian, it can be even French or Spanish or German if you happen to be watching this and heading off somewhere else, Portuguese. Down below in the description to this video I have my free little language learning course that you can go down and enjoy. It'll get you started with some pointers about how to learn languages. I have learned over 10 languages, so I have lots of experience, and I spent a lot of time figuring out how the process works and what you need to be successful. So just tap into my it's probably 2 decades experience with learning languages, and you can speed up that process and save yourself a good amount of time and get further along with whatever language you are planning to learn. Now, looking at how my clients have done, when I started having in-person clients back in 2019, I actually had my first one in 2018. I guess we can start there. And if I look at how many of them learned the local languages, it was not so many in the beginning. I think it was pretty rare. But what I've noticed in the last couple of years is that amongst them, there is a way higher percentage now learning at least the basics of the local language. I would say it's definitely the majority of them. So that has changed. And quite often they're moving to places like here in Warsaw, in Poland, or in the Baltics. With the Russo-Ukrainian war, less guys are moving to Ukraine for understandable reasons. Hopefully that changes in the near future. And they are getting to grips with the local language, because even though the level of English is quite high, they understand after having the in-person experience here that, yeah, it is quite difficult socially to excel if you don't invest in learning the local language. And I'm not saying that it is the only way to be successful with your quality of life here. Say it's Warsaw in Poland. You can make friends, just being dependent on English. You can date girls if you're a single guy without speaking Polish. But it is a big advantage if you do learn the local language. So you're kind of leaving money on the table if you don't, in my opinion. So if you happen to be new to this channel, go check out 3 playlists that I put together. The first one is a series of vlogs from the cities where I live my in-person experience with my clients. So go check that out first. It's the first playlist. You get a sense of the flavor of the region and of hanging out with me in a city like Warsaw, Poland, maybe. Second playlist is vital for the single guys amongst you who are watching. That is a series of tutorials for dating the 9s and 10s, the uber beautiful women of this region. Third playlist is my Vodka Vodcast series, where I dive deep into the mentality of the people and the cultures of this region. Also got some dating advice in longer format there. There's well over 50 hours of content. I've been filming the Vodcast for several years now, so be discerning, scroll through and pick out some of the videos that appeal to you, and you will, in long format, be able to get a better sense of how people in this broader region think, the region I'm dubbing New Europe. Also, if you don't know what New Europe is, I have another video about that. Go check that out after you've watched this one. So, it's the summertime here in Warsaw, Poland, but actually today the weather's changed a little bit. So it's still warm, it's a little bit breezy, and the sun has gone behind the clouds. So I'm gonna say, do widzenia, see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.
Что это? Точно.
Тот это гостям,
Да.
когда гости уходит, ему обязательно в пакет ложат там печенье, баурсак, конфеты.
Со стола.
Да, со стола.
Окей, супер.
Да.
Для гостей.
Да, вот. Для
Казахская
гостей.
традиция. Спасибо.